Good morning, everyone. Sago, Joanne Headstone, yes. We opened up our event last night, and so we didn't close last night because we don't generally close until we're at the end of our event. And so for those who, I just wanted to welcome everyone back. And remember, we're bringing all of our minds, having not came apart, we're all still together. And so as we move through today, it's a reminder that, we've brought our minds together. And we've offered those words up to creation, to Creator, to honor them as well, and to bring our minds together. So just a reminder of that. Remember, Jan said last night, if you do have some stuff that's on your mind, to leave it, the baggage outside. And if you want to pick it up on the way out, feel free. You can leave it too if you wish. So I also want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to this land upon which Queen's University stands. Traditionally, this land was known as part of a vast northern territory under the control of the Haudenosaunee. My people are the Iroquois Confederacy, made up of the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca Nation, and then later joined by Tuscarora. My ancestors, the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk people of the Flint, permanently relocated to this area following the American Revolution, when our original homelands in the Mohawk Valley of Upper New York State was lost. We, along with the Anishinaabe, have hunted and lived on this land since the beginning of time. So our ancient stories tell the birth of our peacemaker, just west of here, and the beginning of the Iroquois Confederacy and the Great Black Peace. So on behalf of my ancestors, my elders, the past and present, the chiefs, clan mothers, and faith keepers, the warriors, the men, women, and children, I welcome you to this land. I would also like to respectfully acknowledge the Anishinaabe and the Métis peoples who also hunted and lived on the land since time immemorial, and we continue to call it home. So, everyone's coming around to do the smudge. Welcome, have a great day, and we'll see you at the end of the day.
Thanks to everyone who's come out, and all the organizers and elders, everyone who's made this, I think so far, a really great event. I have a lot of junk in me, I feel like sometimes, and I really do. I always laugh leave it at the door, and you can pick it up if you want, joke. Every time, I'm trying to be a good one. So, I guess a lot of us are going to talk about Louis Riel and John A. MacDonald. I'm glad I get to go first, because when I say it, it'll sound new and fresh. And I hope a little bit. I'm going to try really hard not to go over a lot of things I hope we already all know. And something I want to avoid doing is falling into kind of a great man style of historical narrative. Like, we have these two, gigantic figures. They're a big part of the history of settler-indigenous relations here. And I want to resist talking about these people as though they're what matter as great men, and I mean all of them. I want a lot of that in quotes for a lot of reasons. I want to talk instead about logics. Now, logic to me is a way of doing, way of being, way of relating. And we're not always aware of the logic we're following, and so this doesn't mean being reasonable. There can be a logic to a situation that defies reason. So it just means the rules we're living by, why we're doing what we're doing, whether we know it or not. And I want to talk about a particular logic, that of the nation-to-nation relationship. How it's evolved here on these lands, and how it might be transformed. So as we know, there's a fundamental disconnect between Indigenous and Western traditions. And that disconnect was there from the beginning of the invasion, and it remains with us today. But at the same time, there are connections across these traditions. They're not completely separated from each other in every way. So there's also been efforts to work across them, because it's possible. But I think those efforts have been limited at the level of this kind of logic that I'm talking about. So that's what I'm going to try and work through here. So what is this logic? How have we been following it? How might we break out of it? So what was the problem between the Red River settlement and Canada? So like I said, I'm going to assume we know about the early days of colonialism. David last night gave us, I thought, a pretty cool trajectory through his work, the life of his family, that, you know, we could have spent a lot more time on that, obviously. That little Manitoban, how it got a little bigger, you know, all that kind of stuff. I'm hoping, as I say, we can assume about that, you know, what happened. And it's often thought that what we had there was a struggle over the allocation of territories to peoples. And I'm sure, I think there was that going on. But I think what else was going on was a struggle by the settler societies to break up an existing system of allocation and replace it with a different one. And in a way, it's been the settler peoples, who I'm part of, who've been running an insurrection for several hundred years against indigenous political systems. We have shown we're terrorists, right, in a certain way. We've shown up, and instead of saying, oh, peace, order, and good government, how shall I behave here? We're like, no, forget it. We're taking over the square. We're taking over the space. We're occupying, right? So I just started to think in that way the last couple of days, actually, out of doing this talk. I haven't thought it through very well. But what are the differences in these systems? Well, the existing system, the indigenous system that's here, that was here and still is here, is a decentralized and autonomy-based system. Relatively non-statist, non-capitalist, and deeply respectful of the land as a provider of sustenance. And the system that's running the insurrection is centralized and authority-based, relies upon the state form of capitalism and the domination of nature. So this is the fundamental disconnect that I'm talking about. And so this conflict, Riel, MacDonald, is a conflict between these two logics, the way I'm thinking about it. So how did this arise? Well, something called a Canada got created here. Now remember, it's not possible for anyone here to bring me a bag of Canada, right? Canada is not a thing. Canada is a way of relating to each other. That's what a Canada is. That's why I call it a Canada. Not O Canada, a Canada. You know, we have created it. We can break it down. So what happened? The Canada, it was a nation state. What do nation states do? They like to get bigger. Little baby nation states, they're kind of like, oh, I'm too small and I'm protected here. I think I might, you know, need to get a little more territory. Right? So this one looked northwest. And it thought, hey, cool. There's nothing out there, right? The Terra Nullius thing, which I'm sure we know about. This is a report from Major Selby Smith in 1876. He says, the appointment of magistrates and encouragement of missionary labor are questions becoming prominent in the dawning development of that noble territory, not long ago only known to the wild Indians of the mountain, the forest and the prairie, to the dissipated nomadic half-breed, and to the hardy trapper, but now silently and patiently awaiting the approach of the immense wave of human life, which must shortly overrun the fair and productive soil of those remote and beautiful solitudes. So this is the fantasy of the empty space that will be populated and necessarily must be populated. This cannot be avoided, it has to happen. But this land wasn't really empty, as I mentioned. There were people there, and there were peoples there, more importantly. They had their own political systems, their own protocols. So you weren't reaching out into nothing. You're reaching out into a situation where people already exist. When people exist and you try and get them out of the way and do your own thing, they will resist pretty much all the time. The Canadians expected this. They've been used to it, right? What they weren't used to was the kind of resistance that came back when they were trying to push their way into the territories that were where hybrid Métis identities had emerged. And this is one of the things I'm interested in, is the way the argument was conducted. So here's Canada coming up, we're going to grab you. What is the response? The response is political philosophy. I mean, there's some guns involved. You know, sure, you got to have guns to back up your philosophy, right? Philosophy without guns? I don't know what that is. Something else. So what is the philosophy that's coming here? Well, here's some key passages from the Declaration of the People of Rupert's Land and the Northwest, written in 1869. This is a great document. I highly recommend it. So it starts out with this excellent rhetoric, which appears to acknowledge the primacy of the European conceptions of peace, order, and good government. I'm leaving out a lot of the flowery language, just reading bits there. It says, it is admitted by all men as a fundamental principle that the public authority commands the obedience and respect of its subjects. Excellent, everyone agree. I call this Socratesing, by the way. You say a bunch of stuff that all good people have to agree with. They go, yeah, Socrates, yeah. And then Socrates says, and you're a bonehead. Ah, Socrates. So, peace, order, and good government. Woo. In accordance with the above first principle, the people of this country had obeyed and respected the authority to which the circumstances which surrounded its infancy compelled it to be subject. We were being good citizens. We were. So there's an acknowledgement of the primacy of the European conception of government, but at the same time an announcement that, hey, we're not infants anymore, we're seeking a more autonomous phase of life. So, here it is. We, the representatives of the people, in council assembled, solemnly declare that from the day on which the government we had always respected abandoned us by transferring to a strange power the sacred authority confided to it, the people of Rupert's Land in the Northwest became free and exempt from all allegiance to said government. So, when the British tried to sell all these territories to the Canadians, the people there went, hold on. Just in the time between when you sold us and they bought us, we declared sovereignty. It's an excellent move. I mean, within the European political system, this should be respected. And then the Métis people invoked their right to make new arrangements. They said, we do declare and proclaim that we have established a provisional government and hold it to be the only and lawful authority now in existence in Rupert's Land and the Northwest, which claims the obedience and respect of the people. And then, this to me is an extremely important part, they said, we hold ourselves in readiness to enter in such negotiations with the Canadian government as may be favorable for the good government and prosperity of this people. We want to have, we've declared autonomy, and autonomy means not mere liberty. Autonomy means, here they're invoking some key ideas as I understand them from indigenous political systems. We're saying, we're going to deal with you, to try and have the best relations we can. Let's treat each other respectfully. So, what was the Canadian response? Well, I think we all know. It was to finish the railway as fast as possible, send in as many troops as possible, use the guns to overcome the political philosophy, and the rest is this. So, could things have been different? And this is where great man narratives, show their uselessness. Like, let's say Sir John A. Macdonald was not so cantankerous. Let's say that he drank less. The Gertrudes alluded to last night, the whiskey in the jar. I'm pretty sure that was one of those jokes about Sir John A. Could it have been better? No. If Sir John A. didn't exist, if he weren't the person he was, then the people in charge of the Canada would have dumped him and put in someone who would have done what he did. There's the Obama problem. Right? It goes on and on. Maybe if the Métis had a better political philosopher than Louis Riel, maybe that would have solved it. I don't think so. They're already too good at political philosophy, doing all this autonomy claiming and everything. Governments don't like that. So, what happened here was at the level of governments. It was at the level of the meaning of the autonomy embedded in indigenous political systems with this logic of the state. And the logic of the state requires bringing as much territory as possible under control. That means not granting, but minimizing the autonomy of all other peoples. And this can't be done under an indigenous political system that is autonomy-based. So that system had to be obliterated. And this is why I'm saying that things had to play out the way in which they did. Now, I'm aware this wasn't entirely successful. I'm aware that there still exists, this indigenous political system in all of its complexities and protocols still exists. There are many federations, and that's happening and resurging. So You know, and that's something I'm going to be relying upon in a minute here when I get to where I'm going. Not doing too bad. But this way of relating through autonomous kinds of understandings has been relatively cleared out of relations between settlers and indigenous peoples, and by the way, amongst settlers themselves. I once was handed a metaphor, no it's not, it's what is it, an allegory, it's an aphorism, but it was this: before the white man could dominate anyone else, he had to dominate himself. And I've been thinking about that one for quite a few years. So, settlers don't relate well. We don't relate well with each other. We go through states, we go through corporations, we refuse to come out to be met amongst ourselves. Again, I'm struggling hard to learn how to have a heart that's that open, that I can do that. To me, that's the fundamental thing that I don't have from my upbringing. So this encounter, this way of being, had to be that way. And it had to be that way because of the state. And if I could be ready for another long period of time, I'd start out about capitalism, because we've got exactly the same kind of problem with the logic of capitalism. And if someone's thinking I mean socialism would be better, I'm going to say Chernobyl. So there is no statist, capitalist / non-capitalist, extractive system that's going to work. So how could we do things differently? I can't just say that and then skate off, right? I think there are lots of possibilities. And I think there are lots of people exploring them. Well, I know there are. And something that is a great resource for this is the fact that while the dominant Western tradition is in fact deeply inimical to indigenous political systems, philosophies, and ways of life, there are minor Western traditions that are not so inimical. And this is where things are possible, right? There are some feminisms, there's deep ecology, there's various libertarian strains of political theory. I could keep listing these, and again, I go on for another big long time. But I just want to cite Ty Alfred in Wasase, wrote a few years ago, where he notes there are important strategic commonalities between indigenous and anarchist ways of seeing and being in the world, including, and I'm going to quote, a rejection of alliances with legalized systems of oppression, non-participation in the institutions that structure colonial relationships, and a belief in bringing about change through direct action, physical resistance, and confrontations with state power. Some of us have been working on how we can develop these kinds of relationships. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing at all. There's no guarantee. And again, I studied for a while with this political theorist named Ernesto Laclau, and he's the, I would say, the smartest person I've ever been around. And Ernesto would, talk. He'd proceed very slowly, and he would say something, and then he'd say, but I'm not saying this, and I'm not saying that, 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 and he started going, oh, we forgot what you were saying, Ernesto. But I, over the years, have learned why he did that, because he wanted people to hear what he was saying, and not put up their hands, so are you saying? Yeah. So I am not saying that all we have to do is work on the margins and act like anarchists and everything's going to be fine. No, it's not. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying it's futile to work inside the system, and I'm not saying it's futile to try and have a revolution that takes state power. I think everybody should be doing everything they can to make the kind of worlds they want. What I'm saying is that those of us who desire to seek certain elements and degrees of autonomy from the currently dominant order could be wiser to proceed in ways that aren't automatically already impossible because of the logic of how we're proceeding. That is, if we want to overcome the logic of the state form, if we want to live autonomously, we can't do it through statist relations. If we want to minimize the domination of nature through extractive processes with a short-term view of profit, then we can't do it in a capitalist system. So it's about what we want. If we set out to do this, then it's probably wise not to do that. That's all I'm saying. So I think what's going to keep happening is that Indigenous nations are going to work on reestablishing their well-being and autonomy. And settlers, I hope, people I want to work with, are going to really take seriously the need to establish radical intentional communities on the margins of this system, occupying where we can. I didn't mean that as a joke, I'm now going to claim I did. And trying to set up these kinds of relations that the Métis people were offering, and of course have been offered less explicitly within the terms of Western political theory from the beginning of the time when the Europeans came here, and continues to be offered. And I'm always, in a sense, almost flummoxed by the fact that any Indigenous people will still continue to offer this to settler people. I mean, there's such a deep commitment to living well and living respectfully with each other, and I'm always blown away by that. And so I think, what I feel I need to do, and the settler people I want to work with need to do, is really become able to respond to that, and that means to heal ourselves, and that means to figure out how to really participate here, how to, in a sense, stop running our insurrection, and shut up and give in to peace, order, and good government.
Annie, bonjour, good morning. I'm honored to be here today for a host of reasons. I'm happy to be here part of this annual symposium, and I'm grateful for the invitation to speak to you today from the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Métis peoples, elders, honored guests, sponsors, and fellow speakers and participants. Thank you very much for your support. First, let me begin by introducing myself. I am a proud Kingstonian. Now, before you go judging, because I know there's judging, I'm not a big fan of Sir John A., and I don't think I'm alone in this particular safe space in saying that. But as you will see clearly through my presentation, what has been alluded to, in the past, in leadership components, the great man theory has always prevailed. And I'm looking at it in a different way, in a different lens. And even though this is a complicated conversation, Riel is not without his faults either. Okay? He's a man just like Sir John A., faults, blemishes like the rest of us. I am, however, a colonial settler with deep Acadian roots and Hungarian, second-generation Hungarian on my maternal side. I am in my second year of my master's degree in education here at Queen's University, and I focus on Aboriginal education, but I could not escape the impact. Thanks. That was perfect. Please do that again in a couple minutes. Awesome. But I could not escape the impact of the Indian Act and Sir John A. Macdonald has had on my studies, my students, and my concept of leadership in the Canadian political sphere. I've used the framework of transformative leadership to guide my understanding of both men as Canadian leaders. My justification is based upon the literary works of Peter Northhouse in his book Leadership Theory and Practice, published in 2013, who described transformative leadership as being concerned with emotions, values, ethics, standards, and long-term goals of teachers, or excuse me, of leaders. Shameless plug in there, I think that's what that was. Freudian plug. This definition by Northhouse would also include the assessment of followers' needs, motives, and treating them as full human beings. This understanding to me is in keeping with many Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. Now, according to columnist and turned author Richard Gwynn, who wrote prolifically 2 volumes on Sir John A. Macdonald recently, at the age of 5 years of age, Sir John A. was already displaying some of his notable traits. What I mean by that is, one time after dinner, little Johnny jumps up on the family table and he begins sharing stories with his family. It's apparently regular practice in the house. And he shares it with such enthusiasm and vigor. He takes 2 steps forward and literally falls off the table onto the floor below. Maybe a pending euphemism there for future political sphere of this particular leader, who knows. But like Riel, like Macdonald, there was challenges. And they both lived in poverty. They both had deep relations. I'll let you judge for yourself what that means with family members. Demonstrated great intelligence and evolved into strikingly charismatic leaders, both energetic, eloquent, and passionate. And this is in keeping with transformative leadership. So we see here a slide entitled Implications for the Selection and Development of Leaders by Shine, who basically looks at educational systems in leadership, but I thought this was quite, it was a good amalgamation of both of the leaders. So basically it looks at these 5 components, the perception and insight. So Riel and Macdonald were very, very perceptive people. For very different reasons. They understood the human condition and what that looked like. And not always did they act on it in proper or appropriate ways, but they had that insight. They also both had motivation, very strong levels of motivation, not just for themselves, but they empowered in others and used a multitude of methods to accomplish their goals. They both embodied emotional strength. We see this pulling effect of Riel with his spirituality, his deep, deep spirituality. But both were impacted by family tragedies. And then we go on to say the abilities to change cultural assumptions. Now, what Shine was referring to as cultural assumption was the institutions or the organizations that these leaders were involved with. And last but not least, ability to create involvement and participation. Riel sometimes, was always very, very strongly supported by his peers, almost to a fault, how loyal his peers were. But sometimes there was so much involvement, it created confusion with his peers. And Macdonald used various techniques, including fear-mongering, to reach his goals. Now, according to Joseph Pope, Macdonald was plagued by internal party jealousy and external rivalries. John's need for full authoritative power created an unwillingness for the Prime Minister to relinquish leadership to another. And Riel was strong but a reluctant leader in many ways, who encouraged his followers to lead in their own right, according to biographer Maggie Siggins. So Riel, in his writings, nowhere did he advocate cruelty to persons. Or his hunger for revenge was not directed at individuals, but an abstract authority which had used its power to humiliate and thwart the likes of Riel and Métis people. His religion was in fact inclusive. Anti-Semitism, bigotry towards Aboriginal and blacks were entirely absent from his writings. What Riel seemed to be struggling with was an idealized system where the morally upright prevailed, and maybe in the wicked world he experienced, coercion forced adherence to a superior moral system which became necessary. And we see that in the 2 quotes I chose. The first one is by Siggins herself, who was a prolific Riel biographer. It says, quote, "What the Métis knew was what they desperately needed was a leader, one of their own, who had the confidence and sophistication, to take on white establishment. And we see that countered by the quote below by Sir John A. Macdonald. These impulsive half-breeds must be kept down with a strong hand until they are swamped by the influx of settlers. So there's no gray there in that last statement at all, in my mind. So how does this impact larger collaborations? So in my opinion, Riel would definitely qualify as a charismatic and visionary leader. Additionally, Riel's leadership transformed ideas into practice for followers to become leaders in their own right and to aid others around them to live the fullest, living a good life. In short, Louis Riel epitomized a transformative leader. The same could not be said for Macdonald. Donald Crichton, in 1990, characterized the leader as uncooperative. And Donald Swanson, in 1989, remarked how cheeky Sir John A. was. Now, a fitting story, when Sir John A. Macdonald was in Prince Edward Island in 1890, he visited the Legislative Library. In doing so, he was asked to sign the registry of the guest book. And so, under occupation, he wrote, as only John A. would, cabinet maker. So you can see full authority, not relinquishing too much there. Riel did not share the sense of humor that Sir John A. did. So in the time of provincial government, Riel, with all the political skills of manipulation and appeasement, which he had recently cultivated, would be brought into play. Lee would succeed in the end, but not without enormous cost to his physical and mental state. Siggins wrote, quote, "The political quilt that he," referring to Louis, "had so carefully stitched together seemed suddenly a work of art. Without text to guide him, he had accomplished for the Métis what few other Native people in North America had managed, a near bloodless resistance to an authority bent on denying their rights, a telling testimony to Riel's remarkable accomplishment." With the question of what are the attributes of leaders, it spurred much debate. And in 1988, two researchers, Ballard and Sufeld, asked 37 historians and 60 political scientists to rate the performance of Canadian prime ministers. The study revealed that Sir John A. rated first among many scales, such as approach to problem solving, party leadership effectiveness, approach to governing. Now, conversely, and not perhaps shocking to many, Sir John A. Macdonald received the second to last rating in one key area: honesty in public dealings. And on April 26, 1888, Macdonald in the House of Commons stood and openly shared his inflexible ideas of race and rights based on the quote here. Quote, "I have no doubt that every Indian in the slightest pretense to have white blood in his veins claimed to be a white man. And on their establishing that they had white blood, they came under the law and became entitled to script." And it's easy to see with his words when he rose and said these words, based on honesty. He had honesty, but not flexibility. The Pacific Scandal, we all recall, and obviously his ongoing and continuous effects we feel with Aboriginal relations. Riel had a lasting impact on the province of Manitoba with his leadership prowess and impactful oratory. His original government and later the Red River Rebellion inspired the development of public policy issues related to, but not limited to, language, religion, and educational systems in Canada. Gripped by coercion within his executive council, he struggled with mental health issues, Riel stood as a beacon of light for many Native and non-Native peoples, plagued by a government who at every turn attempted to crush his utopian dreams of democracy. Louis Riel is revealed as a strong leader and a hero to many Francophone, Indigenous, and historical enthusiasts. Few people stand for their moral convictions on such a large, impactful scale as Louis Riel. Historically, if we did not have leaders that talked themselves off tables, Indigenous and specifically Métis nations would not be perpetually forced to take 2 steps back from their own effective forms of leadership. Thank you.
Greetings everyone. I'm so honored to be here today to share my thoughts on the legacy of Sir John A. Macdonald in relation to the Métis people and Louis Riel. As this gathering is contributing to building the political consciousness of the decolonization movement, I'd like to acknowledge the keepers of the territory occupied by the city of Kingston, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. I'd like to acknowledge the conference organizers. I just got here, so I haven't met you yet, but I look forward to that. For organizing such an original and thought-provoking conference topic, for their hard work, and for providing our community with the occasion to come together on this day. With the knowledge that tomorrow, November the 16th, is Louis Riel Day, a day to recognize the contributions of Riel and the Métis to the development of this land. I have with me today Métis Nation literature on Louis Riel Day, if anyone is so kind after the conference or on break. Also, my thanks to the participants for being here to share their stories, to teach, and to learn about this topic on the man they call Sir John A. Macdonald. Likewise, my research partner, Dr. Stephen Gray, couldn't be here today, so I'm presenting on our behalf. He sends his greetings and thanks to the organizers, and hopes that everyone has a great time sharing stories and knowledge and learning from one another today. And that we all leave here with spirits high after having participated in the community to return to our respective communities to share the insights we've gained about the memorializations of Macdonald. I'd like to say that prior to researching this paper for this gathering, I did not know that Kingston was John A. Macdonald's home base, so I wanted to recognize that here we are in the heart of this territory to critically examine his legacy and impact on First Nations communities at Métis then and now. And where the accomplishments for which Macdonald is celebrated concern the repression of First Nations and Métis people, I think we should all take comfort in the fact that many of us may have arrived in Kingston today for the conference on the 401, a highway joining Upper and Lower Canada, officially named the Macdonald-Cartier Highway. After the country's first Prime Minister, Jacques Cartier, the explorer of New France, of course, to recognize the union of Scottish and French as the founding European cultures of Canada. Although, of course, we know that the two solitudes of the country, often described as British and French, is more accurately the union of European and First Nation as the founding cultures of the state of Canada. What I'm saying then is that if in examining Macdonald's role in our colonial legacy today should make us feel bad, we can keep in mind that we've already driven all over him to get here at Queens on the highway. On a highway named after a Sir of the Crown, no less. And let us not forget that Chief Teresa Spence, during the winter of Idle No More, reminded everyone that First Nations have a deal with the Queen. And so as we work out our tensions about him today, I say when you journey home, may a smile cross your face, because getting to drive all over him is the least he and his country could do for the grief they have put us through. Now, some of you may recall it, this January 2015 is the bicentennial anniversary of the birth of Sir John A., who was the country's first Prime Minister, of course, although not the first Canadian Prime Minister by birth, as he was born in Glasgow, Scotland. Macdonald's Scottish heritage is particularly interesting were the Métis or Conserge, for it was this union of primarily Scottish and French people with First Nations people at the origins of the genesis of the Métis Nation. Hence their Anglophone and Francophone Métis, where Miguel was a Francophone Catholic who spoke the Métis language known as Michif, as well as other First Nations languages. It is important to note, however, that the Métis people are indeed distinct people. We are not just the mixture of First Nations and European, but a community with a particular lineage of approximately 450,000 people across the country, almost 4 times the size of the population of Kingston, with our own languages, culture, and heritage. With all of this said, I would like to focus today on the memorialization of Macdonald by current Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, from my perspective of a woman of the Métis Nation, a nation that has been, since we have formed, scattered to the 4 winds. I want to share with you what I see as an obvious comparison between Macdonald's relation to the Métis and Louis Riel in his time, and Harper's relation to the Isle No More movement and Cheap Tree Suspense 2 years ago this winter. The idea for this comparison grew from my work with the Métis Nation. As this past October, I attended the Métis Nation of Ontario's Infinite Reach training program, which is a post-secondary student solidarity network with representatives from all over Ontario, so that weekend we were in Kitchener to receive mentorship and guidance from Métis elders. The elders were so generous with the knowledge that they shared, and I was eager to hear their thoughts on this paper. I had explained to them that I was writing on the contemporary political implications of Stephen Harper's true blue, conservative Macdonald-style leadership on matters of First Nations relations. Upon hearing my explanation, one elder identified what she saw as the parallel between the Métis rebellions of 1870 and 1885 and the events of winter 2013 that would become part of what everyone now knows as the Isle No More movement. Hence, it's in her honor that I would like to develop this comparison. While Macdonald presided over the Canadian nation-state's violent repression of the Métis people in the Northwest, it was Prime Minister Stephen Harper this past year who publicly praised the accomplishments of Macdonald. However, before the state's celebration could get underway, the Métis people reappeared in the public eye with a crucial victory in the Supreme Court of Canada, which everyone knows is the Daniels case now, preempting Macdonald's memorialization. So we're developing this idea of the spirit of the Métis, of the ghost. So we say that this ghost is kind of haunting the Conservatives now and crashing the party. So following the visit of my Métis elder, who had explained to me an experience that she had had upon visiting Louis Riel's mother's house and experiencing a spiritual presence there that made this comparison with the Métis repression and Isle No More very clear to her. It seems to me that the public profile achieved by the Isle No movement in 2012 and 13, along with the hunger fast and cheap spends, mark political events illustrating a connection and common parallel back to the 19th century between the time of building the transcontinental railroad in this country to the politics of building new oil pipelines in the early 21st century, as with the Northern Gateway project from Alberta to British Columbia, and the federal government's bending over backwards to accommodate Enbridge. It should be no surprise to us then that the same politics of these economic infrastructure projects, especially the matter of who enjoys the benefits found in Macdonald's time, are present in the Harper era. The Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper has made no secret of his identification with Sir John A. Should not be surprising, and we're interested in exploring the dimensions of the current Prime Minister's fondness for the country's first federal leader. First of all, there's his admiration for the sheer duration of Macdonald's tenure. John A. Macdonald is the longest-serving Canadian Conservative Prime Minister, serving from 1867 to 73, and again from 1878 to 1891. In all, a grand total of 19 years in office as the head of Parliament. In today's political climate, it's difficult to think of a leader that could return to power to govern, let alone for another 13 years. So the duration of his rule certainly gives Harper a goal to shoot for, as he is now the 6th longest serving Canadian Prime Minister. And given that Stephen Harper would have come of age in a time where the Liberals had been the dominant political party at the federal level, from King to Saint Laurent to Pearson to Trudeau governments, the long duration of this political dynasty would explain why Harper would idealize the longest-serving Conservative Prime Minister, albeit having to look back to the late 19th century. Furthermore, on this matter, after a little background research, I discovered that Stephen Harper, along with the American-born Canadian political scientist and Conservative Party strategist Tom Flanagan, had co-authored an opinion piece entitled "Our Benign Dictatorship" in 1997, lamenting the rule of the Liberal Party over the country during much of the 20th century. Remember that Flanagan, formerly based at the University of Calgary, has written several books and articles, as well as granted testimony on behalf of the Crown, by serving as a political lapdog of the settler colonialist state. Of course, it was no less than Isle No More activists who managed to assist Flanagan into early retirement when they managed to elicit him to publicly state his unpopular thoughts about pedophilia being a matter of freedom of expression. The choice title of Harper and Flanagan's article, "Our Benign Dictatorship," also reminds me of the title of a book by Canadian journalist Jeffrey Simpson, who identified Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien as the friendly dictator because of his 10-year reign as Prime Minister. However, the problem of a long tenure as the country's leader has not yet compelled Harper to step down, leading many of us to believe that he may well only step down once he's good and ready. And unfortunately for many of us, Harper long ago dropped the benign part of the dictatorship, as he is not known to be either kind or friendly as the country's top leader. One of Macdonald's most notable achievements was, of course, that he was perhaps above any other politician the most recognizable father of the Confederation of Canada into a modern nation state. As the country's first Prime Minister, he played a lead role in the formation of Canada from the dominion of the British Empire to a sovereign country. The praise lauded on Macdonald for his role in founding the country was strange to many First Nations people. As Sean Ablio, the former leader of the AFN, said recently, "I'm not the Indian Prime Minister," a statement reflecting more broadly, I think, the First Nations approach to governance, namely that our model of confederation does not rely on a strong, centralized government of the sort that produced the MacArthur strongman leadership. Our model involves a manner of politics that is more inclusive of the diversity of voices, in that strength relies with the body. For consider the role of multiple voices of the chiefs of the AFN pressuring Ablio to not to attend, the meeting with Prime Minister Harper during that January of 2013 during Isle No More, although Ablio did go and was probably pressured by the Prime Minister's office to attend. Where my interests as a Métis scholar and activist are concerned, perhaps the most significant accomplishment of Prime Minister Macdonald was his role in the building of the country's transcontinental railroad. Of course, his part in orchestrating the public guarantees, land grabs, and government mismanagement necessary to finance the construction of this public work by Canadian Pacific ultimately led him to losing the election in January 1874, thereby committing Macdonald to the opposition benches for the next 5 years, marking the end of his first tenure in power. I guess if Harper loses to Trudeau Liberals in May and simultaneously assumes the role of the leadership of the opposition in the House of Parliament, much like Macdonald, then we should have even more cause for worry. The Canadian Pacific Railroad project was the result of a promise made in 1871 by the federal government to entice British Columbia to join Confederation. According to the agreement, the railroad was to be completed by 1881 but required a 10-year extension, though it was completed much earlier in 5 years by 1885. In terms of the Métis Nation, the building of this symbol of national unity commenced following the Red River Rebellion of 1870 and was completed just in time for the Northwest Rebellion of 1885. This public project was so essential to uniting this wide and expansive land once it had been consolidated formally and declared a country, was then used to expedite the clearing of the plains. So I see a parallel with the building of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, then, and the effort by the Harper government now to fast-track approval for the Northern Gateway Pipeline, especially where the Energy Board's role and Harper's willingness to rewrite rules, grant public subsidies, gut environmental legislation, and ignore treaty rights is concerned. We are once again faced with a government unwilling to honor our commitment to the land. Moreover, with the Harper government's enthusiastic and unconditional support for the Keystone Pipeline, whereas the Obama administration has held up the project, it would seem he has learned a thing or two from McDonald's instrumental role in getting the Canadian Pacific Railroad built. It is no exaggeration to say that the fast-tracking of the CP Railroad was influenced in no small part by the success of the Métis and the Red River Rebellion. Whereas in 1870, the Canadian military had to march through the dense Canadian Shield all the way to Fort Garrison in Winnipeg, taking some 6 weeks to get there. By the time of the Northwest Rebellion, 15 years later, the railroad enabled the military to surprise attack the Métis as the iron horse cut down required travel time by weeks. As I currently live in London, Ontario, just a few blocks from the Canadian Pacific Rail Yard, which I must often cross several times a day, the connection between the CP and the fate of the Métis at the battles of Dug Lake and Batoche is not lost on them. Funnily enough, located on the other side of the railroad yard is the former CFB London, where the Wolseley Barracks are located. Built in 1888 and named after then Colonel Garnet Wolseley, who led a military force of 1,000 men from Toronto on a 600-mile march through dense woods and rivers among the black flies and mosquitoes of Red River summer, along Lake Superior Red River to confront Bale and the Métis in 1870. These barracks house a military museum. Shockingly enough, at the beginning of this exhibit is a tribute memorial to what is now called the Wolseley Expedition. And as a member of the Métis Nation, it's very surprising to see upon entering the exhibit that it begins with a tribute to a violent state repression, leading to me to believe I don't live on the wrong side of the tracks where this matter of Canadian history is concerned. And finally, where my research on the memorialization of MacDonald is concerned, I'm interested in how the country's first Prime Minister provided over the execution of Métis leader Louis Riel. MacDonald, as Prime Minister, oversaw the purchase of the Northwest Territories from the Hudson Bay Company, thereby inheriting the matter of dealing with the half-breeds living there, the Métis, a distinct people who physically embody and spiritually represent the merging of the two founding cultures of Canada. What I find interesting in the execution of our Métis leader is the fact that Riel should be a hero of late 20th century Western alienation of the sort that brought the likes of Stephen Harper to power. While Harper likes to publicize his accolades as a Calgarian, a resident of the West, he was actually born in Toronto, the son of an oil industry corporate executive accountant father, and he transplanted to Calgary to make his political career on the waves of Western alienation after attending the University of Calgary, ground zero of the Conservative Party movement. While Harper admired MacDonald, it was Riel, the political leader, who was the father of the province of Manitoba, and who played such a pivotal role standing up for the rights of the people living in the West against Eastern politicians like MacDonald in the faraway city of Ottawa. With all this said, it is by no stretch of the national imagination to say that Harper likely sees himself as inheriting the mantle from MacDonald, arguably the most accomplished conservative leader of the country's blue-collared political party. In recent memory, only the Prime Ministers Brian Mulroney served for 9 years as Prime Minister, and John Deacon Baker, who served 6 years, are conservative leaders of the contemporary era with tenures in power comparable to the length of Harper's reign. And while Harper is a fan of Deacon Baker, who also relocated as a young child from Ontario to the West, Harper quit as a member of Parliament in Mulroney's Conservative Party to join the Reform Party movement, while Mulroney went on to suffer the worst electoral loss in the history of the Conservative Party. But should you hold your breath, at least for the moment, for Stephen Harper has served as Prime Minister of Canada for 9 years now, and should he win next year's election, he could be Prime Minister for at least 13, should he so choose. 3 more than Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. And given that most of Harper's tenure has been since the fallout of the 2008 market crash, It appears that in a tight economic climate of austerity, strongmen leaders such as Harper are elected, and as the current Conservative government is reputedly run directly out of the Prime Minister's office. Never before in Canada's history has political power been so concentrated in the office of the top leader, but it was Riel who was the threat. And perhaps we cannot expect any progress on settler Métis rights from Justin Trudeau, whose father claimed Aboriginal ancestry but was responsible for the White Paper, the 1969 document designed to put an end to the rights of First Nation people as outlined in the Indian Act. Lurking behind the Harper-led state memorialization of the accomplishments of Canada's first Terminator Father Confederation, a man who openly hated the First Nations as well as the French Canadians, is the ghost of Riel and the undying resistance of the Métis people. Undercutting the grand opening of the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg, the Supreme Court recognized in 2013 that Ottawa had failed to distribute the 1.4 million acres of land promised to the Métis in the Manitoba Act. In January 2013, while Harper was celebrating the birthday of Macdonald on what is now called John A. Macdonald Day, which is January 13th, I believe, the federal court system ruled 4 days prior that in Daniels v. Canada, the Métis people are Indians under the Constitution, a decision that was appealed a month later by the federal government, only to have the court rule in favor of the Métis in April 2014. These events are all symbolic marks on the colonial celebration by Harper of the country's first Terminator leader, as recent Métis court victories put a chill on the Macdonald tribute, and as the ghost of Riel reappears 130 years later to give Harper and the blue Conservative government the Métis blues. Chewy wedge.
All right, so this is a question directed towards, is it Amber and Richard. Just kind of combining some of your ideas. Richard, you were saying like our next steps and things like that, or what are some next steps that we can do? And you're talking about looking to our strategic commonalities. And Amber, you had a lot of ideas about, I know you're in education, and I was wondering how you guys could comment on how we could work on changing education to include both of those, but include a reteaching of history that isn't so great man-based and like that.
Wow, how much time do we actually have? Thank you for the question. It is something that I will be contributing my entire life to. So I thank you for the opportunity to answer this. I'll tell you a story. I'm currently a teaching assistant in an equities course here at Queen's in the Faculty of Ed. And throughout its history, not once, with all its wonderful community partnerships, four directions, excellent quality scholars at the faculty and the main campus here in cultural studies, not once has that course, and this is not a critique of anything beyond what I'm trying to share, just the fact that Aboriginal education has never been taught at all until this year. And I'm just a master's student, and I don't know much. But I'm open to the idea of learning more. And we see in recent publications, we see the outcry for more Indigenous knowledges and a greater, deeper dialogue to happen. And I'm glad we're starting, but 1 hour in one course, it's just not enough, right? We can all agree that it's just not enough. So, I don't know, I think that where we go from here in education is strong partnerships, asking tough questions, not shying away, saying I don't know, and looking to people who can share some cultural teachings. And I'm just going to be applying for my PhD next year. Let's hope I get this degree done, knock on wood. But I'm applying for my PhD and I'm looking at curriculum itself, and I think that's one answer, that's one start, that's a catalyst. And also perhaps looking at teacher education, it's just we're failing miserably. I don't know how to say that in any kind of PC way, so there it is.
How do we combine that with social change as well?
Change, in what way are you specifically looking for?
I don't know if this could be more directed to Richard in his ideas of social change, or yours. I just didn't know if there's a way to include kind of what you're saying about the history and what Richard is saying about our next steps, and he was talking about like intentional communities and things like that, and how that could factor in.
Yeah, I mean, education, I'm not sure about that concept. I don't know if that's a concept that I would want to use. And I'm thinking about Gustavo Esteva and Prakash's book called Escaping Education, which some people may have heard of. But things that I think are really important, what I was talking about, working autonomously across the settler-indigenous divide. What I've been coming to understand, the first and most important thing is to work on ourselves, to become as healthy, strong, and open-hearted as we can. That's step one. And I'm a person who's, deeply immersed in theories and books and builds walls of words, as one of my teachers has pointed out very effectively. So for me, in a sense, probably de-education, probably like learning how to not put up walls of words, learning how to be open, is really the most important thing. And I never learned any of that in school, and I've been to school like a lot. I've only learned that from having teachers of a different sort who have pushed me in different ways. So I suppose, for me anyway right now, that's where it's at, is like being able to be together really. And that's a huge, huge task. And to the extent that that's possible, then we get to know each other. Perhaps we are lucky enough to have some knowledge keepers who have who know the land and can help us to learn how to be on that particular land in a respectful and sustainable way. That's another really important thing. I don't know of a school for that either. That's a life. And I think this is one of the problems with the concept of education. It's just that we come to these, places that look like an airport, and it's got this special function that's separated from life, that we think of as being something that isn't what we're always already doing. And I think that's the problem I have with education. I think that to do what's necessary, that it has to be, our whole life has to become about this. Every aspect. And that means a different kind of life.
I would like to echo that. There's no such thing as Indigenous education. There's learning from elders and knowledge keepers. And I have a lot of anxiety about the appropriation of Indigenous knowledge and being taught by white bodies particularly. It is the institutional habit to understand or appropriate, misappropriate, package, and then deliver within that white system, the way of knowing. And I have concerns about your historical inevitability that makes sense in retrospect, but it leaves less room for hope. But I do like the model of these sovereign spaces where these things are already occurring, and I don't think they need to be a dominant mode. I don't think there's a necessity for Indigenous healing of broken systems that don't belong to us. My question more is the talk, I think as an intellectual, you talk towards this right space, and so you have you realize I think we all realize, this is not just directed at you, the incompleteness but perfection of our logic. And you're seeing the imperfections and ways forward, but how do we enact that within these institutions other than through retirement?
And you're asking about working within these institutions?
Working within or exiting, because your model suggests that it can't be done within. And I'm suggesting that if it is done within, it becomes an appropriate practice.
Yeah, and it's something I deal with in my life because I co-teach a course that involves land-based education, and I'm settling. So what am I doing there? What's my role? Is my role to act in this appropriate way? I try to make that not be my role. So I am, so as I'm saying, within this institution now, I'm doing that stuff. And that's because, like, that's what I was trying to say earlier. I'm not saying that, reform is futile. And I'm not saying revolution is futile, and I'm not saying creation of alternatives is futile. In fact, what I'm saying is, we're all right that the people who have disagreed with our way of doing social change, everyone says your way is wrong, and I think we're all right about that. And they're all both futile and our only hope. So as much energy as I've got, I'm doing them all at once. I am not revolutionary. In fact, I have not been radicalized, okay? That's one thing I just want to make clear when I'm speaking in public here. So I do it, and my choice is always, I would rather be in the mix of that, trying to do the best I can to learn and in ways that are as appropriate as possible here in these kind of spaces, than shutting up. I would rather take the slings and arrows of being active rather than those of being just totally complicit. For me, that's what I've got, is to only try. But see, autonomies are always relative. So there always are spaces within these spaces where we can do a bit. I'm always trying hard to create those. I'm always trying to, I last about 5 years in a new space and it becomes institutionalized and I get to run, So for me, it's kind of this moving around, okay, where's their energy? Let's work. Let's work here as hard as we can and keep on moving. But I'm interested to hear, you'll recognize this trick. I think you're a professor too. But I'm interested to hear what you think about that. How do you work within those spaces?
I'm lucky to be in an institution that's 15% of the population is Indigenous, and that's been growing since I've been there 16 years. I'm in a department, we've only got maybe a dozen profs, and 2 of us are Metis, which helps. But in the overall school, we're not even 1%. It's amazing. So there's the idea of getting Indigenous bodies into the spaces. That's priority number 1. Nothing changes without that. I really appreciate you gave a good example right away through this co-teaching. I think that makes a difference. That models a difference. That's an example. But my larger concerns are that our main role is that we're co-opted in and paid well to make the system better, not to make the system Indigenous.
I just want to quote my friend Ty Alford, who says, in a recent talk here, when he was asked about indigenizing the academy, I think he said you can't indigenize the academy.
Bonjour. Antigonisi Kwe Indigenous cause. I'd like to make a few comments, focusing on 2 points: Indigenous education and Indigenous knowledge carriers. First of all, I got the wrong end. Story of my life. First of all, I'm involved in, committed to, I know I look really young, but for 45 years I've been doing what is referred to as Indigenous education, and I'm rather passionate about it and definitely committed. But I would agree that Indigenous education doesn't exist in the way that people talk about it and refer to it, in the way that our institutions are referring to it. However, I am engaged and have worked in the education system and currently do a lot of what they call culture camps. So for me, one of the main messages that I'm focused on is the importance of us building our relationship with creation, with the land, and that being a source of knowledge. But of course, then, if that's true, then we are not separate from that source of knowledge. So knowledge is not external to us, that there's another process in which knowledge emerges. And I suggest that knowledge emerges in that relationship, and that relationship is what we need to reach for, seek, be in, learn how to be in, and that's a lifelong journey. So there is no arrival. You stand at the western doorway and you might be asking the Creator for a bit more time because you definitely are not done. It's in that way that I would hope that knowledge is seen. And when, I often am called a knowledge carrier because I am Medewan and I've been Medewan for a long time. And that is a commitment to learning my people's knowledge and to working to be informed by that knowledge in the way that I live and in the way that I teach and in the way that I'm in relationship with myself and others. So then, two other points. That as called a knowledge carrier, one of the important things to understand about in the language, if you're a carrier and you translate that, it's he passes it on, she passes it on. So there's no ownership or keeping attached to that. Your actual responsibility is to pass it on. So it's a very different concept that too little is made of that, because you see that concept in itself has very much to do with the concept of knowledge itself and the purpose of knowledge itself. And so I wanted to leave that. So the other component is that mainstream talks about knowledge as skills and knowledge. I don't see often that they get to skill, because mostly it's collecting and memorizing and knowledge on that level. Indigenous knowledge is holistic. So it has a spirit, and you can sort of translate that spirit into a belief, a central focus and belief. It has heart. There is a required relationship that's going on. And those two components, which is the reaching for and the continual awareness and transformation of that belief or that relationship with spirit, before it gets to knowledge. So two things that are the cause of knowledge are left out mainstream. So without the spirit, without belief, value, identity, and belonging, because the spirit has to do with place and location. Why is that? Because it's about your relationship to the land. And it's about keeping that relationship and knowing that relationship that knowledge emerges from. Of course, in relationship with others and your teachings and your original instructions. So it's not like a black and white. But the holistic concept is central. That's central to what knowledge is. And I don't hear that talked about enough. And I think it's centrally important. So I think that, I want one other comment, the concept of autonomy. The concept of autonomy is really about relationship, identity, place, and landing. So, and the ability to land in place in terms of land, and in place in terms of your relationship with yourself, which causes you, helps you to be in relationship with others. But of course, that's a chicken and the egg question, you know, because they emerge synchronistically, you know, they happen just like you were born in your mother, that relationship. And that should be a great teacher and reminder about what autonomy is. You might think of it like a rock being dropped into a still lake. There is these rings, circles, complete and whole, that go out. They're individual, they're complete unto themselves, but at no time do any of those beautiful concentric circles that go out, they are never not the water. And that is our reality as human beings. And it's in that way that we are forever seeking, and knowledge is forever emerging from us in the mystery of that and the wonder of that. And with that, and co-teaching is the way to go. It brings, I co-teach with a mainstream man who happens to be a survivor of the Holocaust, and we do some awesome work together, and there's a beautiful confluence that goes on. Miigwech.
My questions to Amber and Andrea. Your title, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then Andrea talking about learning history and rewriting history. We know when our leaders say something, people take it as gospel. And then you guys make a comment on an infamous comment that Stephen Harper made, that Canada is not a colonial country. Many people will learn that, or think that it's that's gospel now, and that it did happen. How would you teach that so it's not taught as gospel?
Yeah, that was a funny thing for him to say, is not a colonial country. So how can we share with students and each other to better understand this concept? I'm not totally sure.
Would you hold up the microphone, please?
Oh. Thank you.
Did you hear? Well, not where the microphone was. I think it needs to be held closer.
Like I mentioned before, the partnerships, I think for me, we need to see more of various views. I think that's really important. In our classrooms, in our open spaces, in our buildings, everywhere, I think we need to have a broader dialogue, a richer dialogue that looks at multiple rings of knowledge. I think I'm very story oriented, and I apologize for that, but basically when it happened was I was teen, of course, last year, and I had 2 students come in and they wanted to look at Harper and the apology in 2008. And they actually, I think, visited you and shared some knowledge, and they did a wonderful mockery, a satirical piece of the apology. And so there was a voiceover, and Harper was played as a puppet, as an ass. And it was brilliant. And I've got to post it so everyone can see it. But so many students sitting in that auditorium, 583 I believe it was last year, had no idea about something so recent. So to say that colonialism is not apparent and intergenerationally felt, that's tough. And as a settler, I have to be careful not to take on the guilt. I have to be careful not to embody that stress, but acknowledging it is super important. We've got to start a dialogue much younger with people and get mainstream views, not always in a predominant position.
I'm wondering if, with that statement that Canada's not a colonial country, we have no history of colonization. And I wonder if with that statement, Harper is placing colonization as something that happens somewhere else. That's something that we do to other peoples. And so I guess as being a young country that Canada has a dubious distinction of not, setting sail and conquering peoples. But I think that education on the history of colonization here and that colonization has happened here is something that we can work towards to educating people.
Hi, my name's Paul Chapu. I'm Métis from the Red River, and I want to thank David for his presentation last night. I saw myself quite often in the stories you were telling, discovering at one point that my mother looked like she was Inuit, and asking myself, like, wait a minute, who are we? Because, well, I grew up as a French Canadian Catholic, and when we spoke of the Métis in our family, c'était les Métis, eux autres, c'est les Métis, pas nous autres. So, finding out that I had this other, as I would say, like the energy of my life that flows through my heart comes from two different sources, two mountains, to this place here. And each with its passions about how to live on this earth. And as I listen, like for instance, it's interesting to say that Canada, from the viewpoint of the dubious honor of being so young that we can't have colonized, I would reframe this word rebellion. Who were involved that I worked with are from Six Nations. And yet their accomplishments are not known in their own community. And one of the people, when he retired from the Ministry of Education, who brought him in to help develop Native Studies, and that was motivated by a non-Indigenous Deputy Minister, Waldron, who had this vision of having Native Studies in high schools, as well as public schools and Native languages as well. And so Mr. Lickers was brought in, and he turned out to be the most masterful bureaucrat you could possibly imagine. And he could, if he was juggling already 13 balls, he could throw in a couple more, no problem. And so a lot was accomplished by this one man as the point man, as it were. And yet, he had to leave his community and suffer certain judgments, because all things provincial on a reserve are not good. The province has no right to be there from their point of view, and yet the federal government has placed the reserves, the people on the reserves, in a situation where, although they shut down the residential schools, to a great extent, students that go to high school from the reserve have to leave. They have to go to residence away from home. And so part of the efforts in developing these curricula was to give a sense of welcomeness, as it were, in the high schools, so that when they got there, Native students could feel that they weren't strangers, that they were in a way acknowledged. However, this word assimilation is always running through my thoughts as I'm talking about education, because once you have the student forced to leave the reserve where they were using their language, where they've successfully established native language courses and the histories are taught there, they're forced to leave and go to a school which is outside, where they experience very heavy-duty racism, fighting in the hallways, and all kinds of abuses that I've been told about. They will either be speaking English or French, depending on where they are. So their language is left at the door, as it were. And if you leave it enough times, picking it up at the door on the way out is not as easy. It's progressively more and more difficult. And the way one conceives of or conceptualizes the world around and our relationship with the land is, I guess, further and further removed from the habitual way of living on the land. And I don't know if any of you, I'm a filmmaker as well as a singer-songwriter and a whole bunch of other things. But I love the arts, and I really always took to heart the same model this so-called prophecy that Riel made, that his people will sleep for 100 years and when they awaken as the artists will give back their spirit. I took that wholeheartedly, and I think that whoever said it, whoever invented it, doesn't matter. I think it's true that the artists are the conscience of the people. They, like it or not, must suffer the awareness of what is actually going on around them, and cannot help but want to speak to that in one way or another. And in the process of doing that, in looking at what is painful and dark, create light and beauty. And that is really our job as human beings, because we're provided with everything we need here. And so our job, and our only way we can really give back to the Creator, is to create beauty. And so all words leading to relationships that honor one another are important. In the indigenous models that I'm aware of, in the Midwayman's approaches to teachings, knowledge is not something that you just go and pay for a course. It's something you ask for. You offer tobacco in some cases. And then if that tobacco is accepted, then it's understood that the elder or the knowledge keeper will transmit that knowledge. If the keeper of the knowledge comes to the conclusion that that person is ready for the knowledge, it's not a matter of you're not worthy, or it's are you ready? Because once the knowledge is standard office, that person could harm somebody potentially if they're not ready. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into the transference of knowledge versus training. And I see in my last five years here in the institution of Queen's University, I see progressively that it's shifting from what I would call education in the sense of knowledge-based education that helps one become a human being, to training driven by corporate interests who are funding chairs and so on. And certain departments here have beautiful buildings and beautiful everything, and others are less so. So even within this, there's hierarchy here. And so knowledge is, it's not respected as knowledge. And I think that because we don't have that sacredness in our approach to knowledge as the priority, as the starting point, then it goes downhill from there, because we don't understand how we're going to use that knowledge necessarily for the highest good. And in this film, Cree Hunters of the North, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this film, but it's a story before the big dams in northern Quebec go in. At a certain point, it documents the European documentary filmmakers come in and they tell the story of the Northern Cree, these three families that live together for an entire winter in a very small log cabin that they make right at the start of the winter when it's approaching. And at the end of which, there is never a fight, there's never an argument, there's 3 families with the children, everybody is working together on the land. And whenever I've had the privilege of interviewing elders along the way, and we come to the issue of like how are we going to deal with these traumas, and they always, almost invariably say, we go out on the land. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you again to the presenters, and thank you for all your